Okay, let's see. How's everybody doing? Welcome back to another week of the DSKUS Data Science Exchange Program. Happy to have all you guys back. Hope you enjoyed the first week activities. Drink a little bit of coffee here. No, I'm not gonna drink any coffee. It's too hot. Okay, never mind. So this recording's not going so well so far. Anyway, hopefully happy to have all you guys back. And this week, this is the second week of the program. We're going to get into the actual content. So this week, you guys are going to be expected to start meeting with your groups and working on some of the first activities, all geared towards here in a few months, arriving at a sort of final product, a final proposal. Other good news, well, we'll leave that to later. But so this week we're going to cover what you guys need to start working on this week, and then of course you can meet with your mentors and kind of meet with your team members and work on these activities too during the week. But in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what we should be doing this week and really over the next couple weeks, we're gonna have a little lecture here. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So the first month, if you guys remember, the first month of the program, of this sort of program, is focused on background research. So we want to develop a certain level of expertise. And so in order to do that, we're going to follow a number of steps, right? So today we're going to start talking about part of that, and then we'll talk more about it next week and the week after that. But this week in particular, we're going to focus on research methods, which maybe some of you guys know about. Some of you guys are actually PhD students. Some of you guys are master's students. A few of you are undergraduates, actually, seniors and stuff, upperclassmen. And some of you guys have done research, I know, because I work with some of you guys, and some of you guys maybe haven't, but that's okay. All right, we're going to talk about today how we're going to go about this and the methods that we're going to use to try to develop our own expertise in the topic areas that your group has been assigned to. And that is really the kind of focus over the next few weeks. Now, the first thing I'll say right off the bat is like, why do we do this? Then you may be wondering, why does this matter? Well, the reason that it matters is you are not the first person to do whatever you're doing. There are very few things in life that nobody has ever tried before, or at least hasn't tried something similar. Usually, no matter what you're trying to do, somebody has tried it or something similar, right? And so given that, it makes a lot of sense for us to learn from what other people have done, right? Why not, right? Why not go look at what other people have tried and learn from their successes, learn from their failures, right? And then try to build upon those things, right? In reality, it actually doesn't make any sense to just reinvent the wheel. It's already been done, right? It makes a lot of sense instead to look at what other people have done. So we want to do that. We want to go off and look at what other people have done and learn from it. And that's going to make what we do better. And so that's something that you guys are going to need to do as a first step in your projects. But more broadly in data science, this is always a good first step, right? When somebody hands you a problem or hands you a data set, right? You should always kind of adopt this as your first step, right? Go look around and figure out what other people have tried, right? Before you start trying stuff yourself, because you may just be wasting time if you don't do that, right? So this is what we're going to do in this class. Now, there's a few different purposes to this, right? And so we can kind of think about those a little bit more deeply. Some of these purposes I have here on the screen. So one of the purposes are we may want to better define the questions, right? Random noise outside my office. What somebody's doing. Better define the questions that we're asking, right? There are probably a lot of different research questions that we could try to answer related to our topics, right? So some of you guys are working on things like disinformation campaigns. Well, there's a lot of different ways a lot of different questions we could ask about that, right? We could ask about like how different organizations or governments or groups disseminate disinformation. We could ask questions about the types of disinformation they produce. We could ask questions about the sort of targets of those disinformation campaigns. We could ask questions about the effects of those disinformation campaigns, right? So like what people are they targeting, and then how effective is it? Like what's the result that they're actually achieving, right? So there are many different questions we could ask. And this is true of any data science project, right? And all the projects you guys are working on. So one thing we want to get out of this background research is a better understanding of which questions that we want to ask, right? Because there are many, many different questions we can ask about any particular topic. And once we've actually defined, a question, or say a set of questions, because there may be, a lot of times there's not one question. A lot of times there's 2, 3, 4 questions we're really interested in. But once we've decided on what those are, we can also better define them, right? So we can make it a little bit more precise, exactly what we're asking and what we want to know. What do we want to actually measure, right? And that'll give us a better data analysis later, because we'll have a much better idea of what our question is. Once we have our questions, of course, we can also then use that to generate testable hypotheses, right? So eventually we're going to gather some data and we're actually going to do some analysis. But, outside of just sort of randomly analyzing data, we need to actually have some hypotheses that we're trying to test, right? And so once we have these questions defined, we can kind of take those questions and turn them into testable hypotheses. Not every question is a testable hypothesis, right? A hypothesis is like an educated guess about what we think is true, right? So maybe our question is about the results of disinformation campaigns, but our hypothesis is that those results, one of those results is that it influences the outcomes of political elections in certain countries, right? Or the economy or whatever. And that can be an actual hypothesis and a testable hypothesis. Hopefully, a good hypothesis is always testable, right? So we can take those questions, we can generate hypothesis, and that then leads us to starting to think about what kinds of data sources do we need, right? If we're interested in political elections, well, we're going to have to go find some data about that. If we're interested in economics, we're going to have to go find some data about that. If we're interested in cultural sort of things, then we'll have to go find some data about that. Whatever it is, the questions you have are going to drive hypotheses, and those are going to drive the kinds of data that we need together. And of course, once we've kind of gone through this process, it may also help guide our exploratory data analysis. Later in this course, in like a month, we're going to get to a point where we start kind of exploring the data, brainstorming about possible solutions. And so by doing this background research, you guys are going to come up with much better, more educated sort of ideas about the kinds of ways that maybe if you explore the data in that way, you might get something worthwhile. Because otherwise you're just shooting in the dark. You're just throwing darts in the pitch black. You don't even know where the dartboard is, right? It's a bad idea, right? It's much better to have a clear understanding of the situation. So background research plays a key role in all of this stuff. So this is something that you guys need to do. And honestly, as data scientists, you need to get in the habit of doing this, because it's going to make your data science so much better, right? And so we're going to do this, is we're going to spend the first month doing this. You guys are going to develop, a real expertise in your subject matter so that you guys can speak about it intelligently, right? As I mentioned, one of the problems a lot of times is if you don't know what you're doing or where you're trying to get to, what your goal is, you're probably not going to be successful, right? There are many, many different possible roads you can go down, and honestly, it's confusing, right? It's confusing. In my experience in my data science career, usually when I start on these projects, there's so many options, and it is very, very confusing. And so By doing this process first, we're going to give ourselves a clearer roadmap of what we actually want to accomplish the rest of the semester. So this is something we really do need to invest a lot of time in, because it's going to make everything else better, right? So in general, good research practices kind of follow a sort of process or a set of principles. The first one is that we want to make sure we're generating testable hypotheses, which I've already talked about hypotheses and how those work. We don't just want to be randomly analyzing data and just finding what we find. We actually want to have like a strategy of some sort. And the other is that we need a process to test them, right? So for those of you who have taken my like machine learning classes, which I used to teach at DePaul, but probably you guys, I'm thinking either the people in here were my students while I was there, but definitely some of the students from Hanyang have taken my classes, is we have a structure, right? And that may be a structure to the way we do machine learning, like, the 5 steps of machine learning, or, some other structure, but we need a process to test them. And so we need to have, like I mentioned, a strategy, right? Like around, like, what are we actually going to do with the data once we have it, right? Not just willy-nilly kind of guessing, but we need to actually come up with a plan, right? A plan. And that's something that the research, all this background research is going to drive. And the last bit of good research practices is it's an empirical approach, right? Everything that we do while we're doing an empirical, process, research, or data science, everything we do needs to follow the scientific method, which means we need to kind of come up with ideas, and then we need to look at the evidence, and then we need to use that evidence to come up with our next set of steps. I was just having this conversation with one of the students who's a researcher in my lab here, and they were talking about, what if I did this? What if I did this? And they're actually doing some computer vision analysis. And I told them, listen, what you should do is you should just do this part first, and then you should stop and you should look and see what happens. And then once you do that, that'll kind of let you know what you should do next. And what I said was, by doing that, what you're doing is letting the data itself tell you where to go, right? Instead of you guessing where to go, let the data tell its own story, right? And by the way you do that is following an incremental process of an empirical approach. You do some analysis, you do some background research, you get some ideas, right? And then that helps you evaluate what are the next steps. Where else should I go? Where should I go from here? So you basically take a few steps, you look and see what happens, see what the results are, what you found, and then you use that to guide the process. It's an iterative process, an empirical process, right? We don't jump to conclusions that we don't have evidence for. A data-driven process, if you will, right? So this is something that we're going to do here. So a lot of you guys, of course, probably have some research experience. So you may have done some sort of background research or annotated bibliography in the past, or a lit review of some sort. We all have, at the different universities, different libraries, but I would encourage each of you to learn how to use your own library. Here at Hanyang, we have a library, obviously, the Parkland Library, and there is a library at DePaul. I've used both of these, and they have very nice resources. And there is a very nice library at IU, because I know when I was doing my PhD, I spent a lot of time there. Although nowadays, a lot of things are online, so you don't even have to go. But all 3 of these universities have very nice libraries, and those are one source of information. Another source of information is actually to go use Google Scholar. Right now, I don't know. Switch my screen share up here. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with it. Some of you guys are, definitely ones who've taken my class. But if you're not familiar with it, if you just go to a web browser and type scholar.google.com, it'll take you to something that looks like Google, but is actually searching for papers for things, like research papers, scientific articles. And you can search just like Google. You can see I was actually searching for stuff before about stuff. So I was searching for stuff unrelated to your topic, but if I just type in some keywords, I get all these papers here, right, about the topic. right? And it tells me how many total results there are. And I can limit the range, just like a normal Google. I can say just, let's do the last 5 years, right? There's 11,000 results. I can look through the papers that are here. One really clever way of searching by doing this is if you take this, you can actually, a lot of times, find free PDFs here. If you can't find it online, a lot of times you can actually click on this thing that says like all 5 versions. And a lot of times you'll find somewhere where there is actually a free copy, right? And so just look for these free copies and you can just click on these and open these up, and then boom, and here's the whole paper. You can go read it, right? If you can't find it for free on here, you can also go take the title of the paper and go search at your library. So if I'm at the Paul, I don't even know if there we go, Paul Library. See, I'm not even at the Paul right now. I just found it. So I can't actually use these resources. Maybe, I don't know. Actually, I may still be in the system. But anyway, you can just take the title and put it in here and search for it, right? And see if I can do this without messing up. But say you can't find the paper on Google Scholar, well, then you can go here and look, I just found it, it's right here, right? And it's available online. And I'm not sure how to use the Paul's resource here, but probably somehow there's somewhere you can click on here where you can actually get the full paper, right? Like I said, I don't know exactly how to use all this, but you can see how this works basically, right? Whatever, I'm not gonna wait around for all this to load, but basically you can find a lot of this stuff on probably your library website if you can't find it there. Along with this, I'll point out that sometimes if you find a really good paper somewhere, another thing that you can do is you can, if you see a paper that's been cited a lot, that often means it's an interesting paper, not always, but a lot of times. You can actually click on this cited by, and it'll show you all the papers that have actually cited the paper that you thought was interesting. So you can do this sort of spider web search. You find one really good paper and then look at the papers that cited it. You can also, like, let's say you really like this paper. Once you find this paper and you read it, you're like, wow, that's really good. You can also then look at the papers it cited, right? And say you're like, wow, okay, these look really interesting. I'm really interested in this paper called the Avatar Manifesto. So say you come in here, then you just copy and paste Avatar Manifesto, and then you put it in here, and then we've switched this back to anytime. So what was that? What was the name of the author here? Gregory Little. There it is right there. All right. So now I've just found this paper right here that was cited in the other paper. Now I can go in here and I can read this, right? Now I can read this Avatar Manifesto, right? So this is how you use Google Scholar to kind of do this different stuff. You guys can see that you can find lots of stuff, but of course you guys are not going to be searching for avatars. You're going to come here and search for things like, I don't know, global, say you're searching for global supply chain disruption. I don't know, searching for words, I don't know. And look, I found 268,000 papers. Wow. I mean, you can also do the thing where you can, just like regular Google, put quotes around things. So if you're like, man, I really want to make sure, there's way too much stuff in here that is irrelevant. I'm really interested in global supply chain. Now I got 20,000 papers, right? So you can see there's a lot. And maybe you're like, okay, this makes sense, right? And a lot of this is just clever keyword searching. Just a lot of times just coming up with clever combinations of keywords, just like you're doing a normal Google search. And you just have to be persistent. And if you're persistent, you will come across stuff, right? So this is how Google Scholar works. And I would suggest you guys use this heavily for doing your background research, because you're going to need to be able to find lots of things to read over the next month, so that you can develop this expertise and refine your research questions, right? Your mentors can also help you learn how to use Google Scholar, or maybe some of your teammates in your groups are really good at it. But it's all just, it's all just clever keyword searching and just being persistent, right? The first thing you're going to do is what's called an annotated bibliography, or a lit review, sometimes referred to. So one good approach for doing this, one good approach that I have my students do when they do this in my classes, is to come up with 4 or 5 sort of like aspects or like sort of subtopics, right? So say, like I mentioned, like disinformation campaigns. So maybe you're really interested in, you know, the types of disinformation that governments use. Maybe you're really interested in the targets of disinformation. Maybe you're really interested in the political purposes of it, whatever it is. A good idea with a lit review is to break it up. So instead of trying to find lots of papers about the topic in general, you instead have a number of subtopics, say 4 to 5, 6, however many. You break it up into these subtopics, and then you search for that subtopic, this subtopic, that subtopic, this subtopic, that subtopic, blah, 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 right? And so that's usually a good strategy. So that way you don't have to just search for one big topic. Instead, you're looking for really good papers, you know, a smaller number of papers about each subtopic, and then you still get everything done. And then you can search for sources on Google Scholar. An annotated bibliography or lit review involves usually writing a paragraph or two about each source that summarizes their main point and how it relates to the topic. So basically what you'll do is you'll have like the citation for the paper that you've chosen, and then a paragraph, maybe a couple paragraphs that summarize, like what's the main point of this source, and then how does it relate to your topic? Why did you find it interesting, right? You can also, and this is sometimes helpful, keep a few bullet point highlights from each source. You don't have to do this for every source, but a lot of times this will come in handy later when you're putting together a final presentation or a final report, final paper. I do this all the time while I'm working on research studies, doing the background research, right? So kind of this is a good practice to get into, or if you're ever writing a report, a data science report for your boss, good habit to get into. It makes your sort of writing and presentation skills much stronger by showing that what you've done is grounded in the actual body of evidence beyond simply your analysis, but also what other people have done around the same topic, right? So for this class, you're going to be expected to turn in this annotated bibliography in about 3 to 4 weeks. I can't remember the exact due date, somewhere around the beginning of April. And so you guys are going to need to be working on that. Just in general, I'll mention kind of later on that later on, you're going to probably use a lot of these sources when you write. And so you may need to make sure that you know how to cite appropriately and use the correct formatting. The other thing I'll say is a lot of sources you come across will end up not being useful. You'll get them and you'll start reading it, and you're like, wow, this seems really cool. And you'll get kind of 2, 3, 4 paragraphs in, and you're like, actually, this kind of sucks. And that happens a lot. And so a lot of times, in order to come up with like 10 really good sources, you end up reading like 40 papers, because half of them, you only make it to like the 3rd paragraph, and you're like, right? Some of them, a few more of them, maybe you make it halfway through before you're like, that sucks, right? And then others, you actually make it all the way through, and you're like, okay, you know, this isn't bad, this is all right. And a few of them, you'll actually be like, wow, that was great. That was a great paper, right? And you include the ones that are, you know, the ones that are good, as well as the ones that are pretty good, okay, right? As long as you like actually read it to the end and it added some value, right? But you'll probably need to read a lot more things than you include. When I mentioned the format, and this slide is wrong now, this is not APA format, but you want to adopt some formatting style. So APA format actually involves a different style. This is more typical of like medical or computer science journals, where we put a number in brackets, right, like this. I just realized this from one of my papers. We put our numbers in brackets, and then we, at the end of our paper, we actually put the references in numbered order. And then the numbers actually refer to these numbers, right? So 4 and 6 actually refer to this and this, right? And then we put the citation here, right? You can see our citations here in this format. And this is not APA format because this is actually from I know what this is. This is a paper we wrote for an ACM conference, so that they're using the ACM format. But either way, you need to make sure you follow a format when you do actually do this, right, later on. But for now, this annotated bibliography, you can kind of just generate the annotated bibliography. The other thing to keep in mind, let's see if I can find this, is if you go to, let's see, if you go to the internet, and by the internet, I mean like the actual just normal internet. So we go to Google and we type in annotated bibliography, type in annotated bibliography, you will actually find a bunch of examples like the Purdue site here, which will show you like some examples of what an annotated bibliography should look like. So if you're not absolutely sure, even after my description, you can kind of go here and see, like here, this is exactly what I was describing. They got the citation and then a few paragraphs, right? And there's another one, a citation, and then a couple paragraphs. There's a citation, one paragraph, whatever it is, right? So you can actually go see some examples if you go up on the internet of annotated bibliographies, right? And so this is what your kind of goal is over the next few weeks, right? Is to start doing this research and generate these kinds of annotated bibliographies. Now, that said, I'm going to skip this slide. Yeah, I'm going to skip this slide. The whole point of this slide was simply to explain the research process, but I don't think it's necessary for this particular presentation, so we'll skip over it. Now, for this class in particular, of course, we're focused on policy, right? And for data science and policy, one thing that we want to do is really like take this kind of data-driven approach and really adhere to it, right? There's lots of people coming up with policies, right? And one question people are going to have is what exactly are data scientists going to contribute to policy making? And really where we can contribute is, by using this data-driven approach, rather than just making up policies based on perspectives or opinions or historical trends. And so that means like part of what we're doing here and part of what we'll be doing during the semester is to kind of try to show the value of data science for solving these global policy issues, right? Rather than just make up a policy, right? Part of this, and you'll see this in future lectures and later in the course, is we're going to use this existing evidence to frame our approach, right? This background research. But we're also going to want to think carefully about how our solutions are going to integrate into existing ecosystems, existing data ecosystems. How can our proposed solutions be sustainable, right? Because the world's going to change. The situation is going to change. Circumstances are going to change. Technology is going to change. How can we know that whatever solution we come up with is still going to work 5 years from now? And so we need to think about ways to make our solutions sustainable and ways that we can actually kind of collect data in an ongoing manner so that our solutions can hopefully maybe even sustain themselves, right? These are things that are unique as data scientists that we can bring to bear on policy related issues. So these are things that we want to leverage and focus on because these are kind of the advantage that we provide, right? The benefit that we can provide to helping solve these issues, right? Now, we've already talked, like I mentioned, about the research process and doing the background research. One thing I'll mention about the second bullet point from the previous slide is that the data that we need to make our solutions sustainable may not exist yet, right? there may not be systems in place to collect that data, or there may be systems in place, but they don't collect that type of data right now. So one thing that we may need to include as part of our proposal is new data collection systems, right? So either completely new systems that don't exist right now to collect data that's not being collected right now, or modifications to existing data collection systems to collect different types of data, or add new fields or features, or maybe collect data in a different way than it's currently being collected. These are things we're going to need to think about in order to make our solution work in the real world. To make it sustainable, we're going to need to think about what kinds of data would we need to make that happen, right? And I'll give you guys an example very briefly. Imagine that we implement some sort of mechanism to try counter disinformation campaigns, right? So, on social media or something. Well, it sounds all good and fair and nice, but it's not like other people just sit around and they're like, oh, they've foiled us. They've came up with this policy and it's completely disrupted all of our disinformation strategies. It's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to see what we do, and then they're going to try to react to it, counter it in some way. So we need to anticipate that, right? Because otherwise our policy is going to be a very short-lived success. And in reality, that means it's a failure, right? It needs to be sustainable. And that means we need to think about how the world's going to react to it and what kinds of data systems we need to collect. That means if people are going to change their behavior in terms of disseminating disinformation, then we need to be collecting data about that behavior. And that needs to feed back into our ultimate solution so that it can adapt to things, right? So these are, I'm not going to give you guys any specific answers to how you should solve these problems, whether it's the disinformation campaign or global warming, environmental issues, or global supply chains, or targeted aid development. But these are the kinds of things that you guys need to be thinking about, right? Another one thing I'll mention very briefly is that many policy issues are global in nature, like climate change, or many others. But the data is often siloed within nations, as are often policies. And so this is going to cause a challenge because the data we have is going to kind of exist in these silos. So part of the problem may actually be data integration, and it's going to need to occur on a global scale in order to solve global problems, right? Global policy issues, right? So you guys should probably be thinking about this. And especially when we get into the data gathering stage, as you're observing, like what kind of data is available, and is it actually available on a global scale, or is it siloed within different countries, right? And or is data being collected in different countries in very different ways, right? Like the coronavirus, that's one perfect example of that, where different countries are actually reporting the data very, very differently, which makes it very, very difficult to come up with a worldwide sort of global sort of approach to solving it when one country is doing it this way and another country is doing it that way. The data is very inconsistent, right? And that's a challenge, right? And so this is something you guys will probably face as well. All this kind of leads to this here, the sort of the previous slide means we need to coordinate across nations for many problems, right? Both in terms of the policy as well as the data availability. And then there's also a matter of policy integration, which we'll talk about later in the course, but a lack of coordination in policies across different nations will cause a policy to fail. So even if a policy is a really good policy, if one country implements it and everybody else is doing something different, then that policy is not going to be very successful. Not because it's a bad policy, but because there was a lack of policy integration across the broader community, right? It's like if you got one person on the bus singing one song and everybody else is singing a different song, everything's all messed up, right? So we need everybody to be on the same page, right? Everybody needs to be on the same page. Anyway, so that is that. So this is not really for next class, but this is for the next few weeks. Here's what we want you guys to start working on this week. And you'll continue to work on this over the next few weeks. And in a couple of weeks, we'll actually add another thing to start working on. And this is going to kind of carry through the semester. A lot of the times we'll actually be kind of finishing one thing while you're starting the next thing, right? And as I tell students who've taken these data science project-based courses with me in the past, is it seems like you have a lot of time, but you don't have a lot of time, right? We're going to start layering the next step. So in a couple of weeks, we'll start looking for data sources, right? Don't worry about that right now. I want you guys to start. Don't even worry about data right now. I want you guys to start by focusing on the background research, right? And trying to learn as much as you can about your topic, but be aware in a couple of weeks, you're going to have the next thing you have to start working on at the same time that you're finishing this. And then while you're finishing that next thing, there'll be another thing or two things to get added. And that'll be how everything will work during the entire semester. So you do need to kind of try to make progress on this starting this week, because it'll be a fair amount of work and a fair amount of reading. But if you really want to be experts at this so that you can do good data science, then this is just part of the process, right? So for each of the groups, what we're expecting is that you guys can produce an annotated bibliography with 40 good sources, right? And it's going to be 10 per person. Like I said, they can be broken up, so you can look at, you don't have to look at just the topic in general. You can look at sort of subtopics within there, and you can go look for, say you have 7 subtopics, you can go look for 6 papers about each of those, right? But they need to be good sources. And in order to find those means you're probably going to have to read, you want to find, 10 good sources, you're probably gonna have to read 20 or 30 papers, at least part of them, at least a few paragraphs, so that you can actually hunt down 10 of them that are actually worthwhile, right? They need to be legitimate sources, so not Wikipedia. So those, by that I mean they either need to be like academic journals from like Google Scholar, like legitimate scientific publications, or they need to be reputable news organizations, right? Wall Street, Wall Street Times, New York Times, the Wall Street Post, those kind of things, legitimate, big time, respectable news organizations, right? Not, Larry's conspiracy theory.com, things. Okay. So, reputable news organizations or legitimate scientific journals. I would say the majority of your stuff should come from like scientific academic journals, 80% of it at least, right? You can have some stuff from reputable news organizations, but that should not be the bulk of what you get. I would say a lot of what you find should be, 70, 80% should be like scientific academic articles, right? Not a fixed number, but something like that, right? Each member should contribute some. So what we actually said, it should basically be 10 per person. You have 4 members of your group. And this bibliography not only will become, the basis for, you're going to turn in as your annotated bibliography, but it will also be the basis for your lit review in your final presentation and report. So later when you write up your report, you'll need a section where you talk about background research. Well, this annotated bibliography will basically, you can use that to write that section. The all-class meeting already happened, so never mind, although I'm recording this right before it happened, so it made sense when I made the slide. So don't worry about that. But for next week, so for the week of I guess like the 14th, right? That week, sometime the 13th, 14th, sometime during that week, you guys should set up a weekly Zoom meeting with your group and your faculty mentor, and you should start meeting weekly, right, on Zoom. It doesn't have to be a long meeting. It doesn't have to be for like hours, even 20 minutes, 30 minutes, so that you guys can talk and come up with a plan. Okay, who's going to do what? What are you going to work on? What am I going to work on? Maybe do some brainstorming, right? Outside of that, you can communicate sort of asynchronously, via chat or Slack or Discord, but you should always try to meet, you know, for like live for like 20-30 minutes each week to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that you're making progress. Okay. So if you have questions, please email me and reach out to me, and I'll try to explain. But hopefully everybody is excited about getting started. I know we're all really excited. So I think it's going to be really cool. So I hope you guys have a nice week, and I will talk to you guys next week. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.